Second here. Please let me know if you can see my screen. Can everybody see my screen? Okay, awesome. Thank you for that confirmation. Just trying to locate where we stopped yesterday. Second. Okay, I think we stopped right about here. I'll go into presentation mode. Okay, someone asked a question yesterday about the difference between, I think it was the difference between a wireframe and a mock-up. The person who asked the question, are you in class? Can you let me know, please?
Yes, I am, Abiola.
Oh, yeah. Odonayo, hi. Sorry, I didn't want to call the wrong name. Okay. So yesterday, I think this was the slide I was on when I talked about the different ways in which you could reflect the requirements you gathered so that you can share with the people that you gather the requirement from to get feedback from them. So a lot of times you're going to use narratives, right? Like typed in a Microsoft Word document. And other times you're going to use images. A good BA uses both. It's just about knowing the right way to communicate the requirement based on who you're talking to and based on the type of requirement that it is, right? So that was when I talked about mock-ups, models, wireframes, and prototypes. So now you asked the question and said, well, what's the difference? Maybe she's heard it used interchangeably and she wanted to know what the difference was. So I have a diagram. I'll show you this diagram quickly before I go to the slide before it. So on this diagram, you can see we have three images, sorry, on this slide. The first one is a wireframe. So you can say a wireframe is like a rough sketch, or it could be like a user interface. Let's say that you're building this application, implementing this application, and there's going to be different pages, right? And you want to show the end user what the page might look like. Primarily, what type of information you're going to capture on it. Whether menu is going to go to the right and search will go to the left is open, for discussion, basically. And one of the things when you're doing a wireframe is that you don't want to, even with a mock-up, you don't want to give the person you're dealing with, like the stakeholder, you don't want to tell them that 100% this is how it's going to be developed. Because remember, you, the BA, you're the one creating this wireframe or mock-up. You're not the one building it once we start implementing the tool. So there may even be some limitations that would make it difficult or almost impossible to build it a certain way, right? So again, the reason you're creating this wireframe is to get feedback. Do we have the right information on there? The way we've laid out the information, is it good? Do we need to change it, right? Then we go to a mock-up. You can say a mock-up is more real, if that's correct English, right? Compared to what you have on the wireframe. The wireframe is like it shows the structure, but not, you can see there is no color. There is no color, there is no, it's not as detailed as what you'd have in a mock-up. So I was saying, I think it was in the class yesterday, that one of the tools that I've used to create a mock-up is called balsamic, like the spice. I can't remember too well if they have a trial version. You may want to look it up online, and if they have a trial version, just try your hands on it. It has colors. You can choose different types of buttons that you want to have on there. Before I joined that employer, I'd never used balsamic. I encountered balsamic on that job, and I learned how to use it in no time. I was able to use it. A lot of tools that you're going to use to create like wireframes or mockups, they're not complicated to use. Find one online and just get comfortable with it. When you get on the job, even if the tool they're using there is different from yours, from what you know how to use, if you understand the concept of creating a wireframe and creating a mockup, that's knowledge that's going to stay with you. For the next two, you're just going to figure out what the difference is and you should be able to use it. So anyway, we've talked about a wireframe and a mockup. You see, a wireframe, sometimes you can even draw it on a piece of paper if there's no tool. Because again, why are you creating a wireframe? To get feedback, right? So they can tell you, are you on track in the way that you're envisioning it or in the way that your team is envisioning it? Okay, but when you want to create a mock-up, you do a better job using a tool. Now, most tools that will do a mock-up will be able to do a wireframe as well. I only said that in case your company doesn't have a tool, right? And you're gathering requirements and your end users are telling you about the expectation of the user interface, you can still use a pen and paper, right, to get some of that feedback. And then we have a prototype. Now, a prototype is more real than what you'd have with a wireframe and a mock-up. A prototype is like a reduced version of the actual solution. The users can engage with it. They can go on there, they can press on a button, they can try to do like, they can try to share, right? It's a scaled down version of the solution that the users can interact with, right? And based on the interaction, they're able to give you like more detailed feedback and say, oh, we really like this. Oh, no, that doesn't work. Oh, this page shouldn't open until we do this other thing, right? With a prototype, you can see the sequence of events. Even with a mock-up, because usually when you create a mock-up, right, you just don't create one like this, right? Let's say you have this page on the mock-up. If let's say that when they click on the search bar, right? When they click on this search icon, an empty bar shows up where they can type into. Then your next mock-up is going to be that one showing that now they've clicked on that search and this thing has opened up. I hope everybody's following. So like we're going to imagine that the user is actually interacting with the screen. So when they press on the Twitter icon, let's say this was a fully developed application and they click the Twitter icon, what should happen? You create a mock-up of that as well. So you're going to tell a story with the series of screenshots or with the series of mock-ups that you're going to have. Okay? The difference between that and a prototype is that with the prototype, they would actually be able to click on it. They're not imagining it. So they'll be able to click on it and be able to show them the next page. So basically, all I'm saying here is that there's progression, as you see, right? From wireframe to mock-up to prototype. I do have a slide in here that explains, okay, you're not going to have it in your version of the PowerPoint presentation. So maybe I'll send this updated copy to Blackforce and they can share it with you. So anyway, wireframes outline the basic design, the design structure, function, and content of a page, right? So just like you saw here, it's fairly basic. No color, we're not even saying what the buttons will look like, but we're telling you that you'd have the ability to like, share, comment, right? But there's no design per se in here. Okay, mockups provide a more authentic representation, offering a visual preview of the product's design and its envisioned use. Okay, so it may include colors, styles, buttons, and all of that. But it is still, there's nothing, the user can't really engage with it. The user can imagine it based on, the 10 mockups that you've created to tell a story. But it's not like they can do anything with your mockup because they're basically images, right? The prototypes are more detailed, and oftentimes a prototype is real. Like when they say, oh, this is a prototype of the latest Samsung, it's like a Samsung phone, but it's not going to be the full-fledged developed Samsung phone when it's developed. I'm sure that the people who create prototypes that still do nothing, but again, it begs the question, why did they even create the prototype if the prototype can't really do anything? So for most prototypes, right, it provides a comprehensive demonstration of how the users will engage with that solution and how they would navigate through it. Okay. Odunayo, does that answer your question before we jump into today's class?
Yes, yes, it does. Thank you.
Okay.
So just to be sure I got like the explanation. So when it comes to at what point, is it safe to say like the wireframe is more like at the beginning than the prototype beginning of maybe the project when you're just implementing and trying to like envision what you want it to be like. And prototype is when we're almost at the end and we have something more concrete to show.
Good question. So not every company does prototyping, right? I've mentioned this so you know that these things exist. Your company may not even do prototyping, and even if they do, it's not going to be you, the BA, because you're not building, right? It's not going to be, like the requirements for building the prototype may come through you, but you, the BA, are not going to be prototyping. If there's any of this that the BA will be creating, it typically will be maybe a wireframe. Most companies want, maybe they'd like the idea of wireframe just to be able to get the early feedback. Remember, some of them don't even have this tool for mock-up. Like in all the companies that I've worked in, maybe only 2 of them had tools for actual mock-ups. So again, not every company, which is why I don't want to say, but to your question, right? If we look at timing, right? Chances are a wireframe would happen before a prototype, but I'm saying that a prototype doesn't even necessarily happen. Sometimes a mock-up does not happen. It just depends on your company. The company where I created the mock-up, we did not do wireframing. We went straight to mock-up, right? And it was the culture of the company to have mock-ups done when, on their projects, right? And then I moved on to the next company, no mock-up. In fact, we went straight to demos, right? Because we had external vendors coming in to build the solution. And they just came and showed us the solution. We were not the ones building it. Although I say that to mean context matters. A lot of what I'm teaching, right? Maybe 20% of it will be applicable on one job, and then the next job, they don't even do it. So I understand your question, and I hope I answered it. From a sequence standpoint, wireframe comes earlier than prototype. But wireframe is not necessarily a precursor to prototype. Your company may not even do prototypes. They may not even have a tool for mockup, or they may go straight to mockup and say no wireframe. So it's not which one happens first, really. Because if a company can do mock-up, chances are they're not going to waste time on wireframe, right? Wireframe is bare bones. Do you understand what I mean, or do I? Or did I
Yes, I do.
confuse
Thank
you?
you. No,
I,
no,
okay,
no. I understand. Yes, thank you.
okay, good. Yeah. So again, there is no sequence per se here. It's not that we'll do wireframe, then we'll move to mock-up. No, sometimes we do mock-up and that's it. From mock-up, we build the full-fledged solution. Okay. Damilola, I'm not sure I understand what you mean by so wireframes and mockups are in 2 dimension. What do you mean by that? Damilola, do you want to speak up so we understand your question? Okay, I guess not. Joe, thank you for putting a link to Balsamic in the chat. Yeah, everyone, I'd encourage you go into the chat and see how it's spelled. And if you can look it up, look it up. And if they don't have a trial version, look for just Google tools that, mock-up tools, and find anyone that has a free version that you can practice with. Okay, so we're on document analysis. So we have a few more tools that we're going to look at for how you go about gathering requirements. And I am hoping that I'll go through these 3 tools or 2, however many we have left. I'm hoping we can have a conversation around it. The reason I'm hoping we can have a conversation around it is that, as you already know, requirement gathering is one of the things you're going to spend most of your time on as a BA. This is an opportunity to ask questions. I know questions like which one is the best one, that wouldn't really be a valid question because there is no best one, right? What works for you? What's your stakeholder audience like? Right? What kind of people are you meeting with? What kind of requirements are you trying to gather? Those are the things that would go into making that decision on, okay, these are the 2 tools that I'm going to use all through the requirement gathering. However, you can ask questions like, okay, given this scenario, paint a scenario and say, Abiola, what would you do? That would help me really give context to your question and be able to better answer it, right? But there isn't really any such thing as is interview better than brainstorming. In certain situations, interview might be better, right? So unless we're talking about actual situations, I really wouldn't be able to tell you which one is better. Coupled with the fact that a lot of this has to do with your personality as well. If you're the kind of person who doesn't feel comfortable engaging multiple people at once, you may not want to start with a workshop. If you're the kind of person who you need a bit of time to warm up to people, like if they put you in front of a stranger, you find it a bit challenging to just hit the ground running with them. Not that you're not a good BA, but you need that time to assess the person and figure out how to engage them. Well, maybe one-on-one might be better than you going into a meeting with 4 strangers at the same time, right? So that's where the you factor comes in as well. Another thing you'd consider is how much time you have and how big your stakeholder group is. If you have a stakeholder group of about 20 people and you have 3 months to gather requirement from them, one-on-one may not work. Chances are it won't work. It's not going to be enough time. So now, not only is your personality a factor, there's also how many people you need to gather requirement from and how much time you have to gather the requirement. Another factor is how well versed are you in that topic. If you've never worked in this industry, you don't even understand their business processes, right? And then you go into a brainstorming session or a workshop session, depending on how many people are there, and ideas are flying left, right, and center. You do not have a scribe. How will you manage that flow of information? So you can see how there's so many factors that can affect it, which is why I said, it's not a matter of which one is better. There is maybe the best one given a situation, but without the context of the situation, I really can't tell you which one is better. It's not like one will give you better information than the other one. Whether the information is good or not, I think it depends on you. Because if they're giving you information that is not good enough and you don't have the ability or the skill to be able to navigate that, to redirect them, so they're giving you the information you actually need, that's more you than them. They came into the meeting ready to give you information, but not every information is useful for the purposes of the meeting, right? You're there to gather requirements and they're telling you things that are not really relevant to requirement. You need to be able to redirect that conversation, right? So again, just to reiterate, it's not a matter of which is better. It's a matter of what is the context you're operating in. Do you fully understand it? And based on the tools that you know now, which one, do you think would be best? And again, if you've exhausted you've thought and thought and thought about it and you do not know, ask another BA, paint that picture for them and say, what would you do in this situation? And hopefully they'd be able to advise you based on their experience. Okay, so moving on today, we have document analysis. Document analysis is basically they give you a document and you're reading that document to be able to understand the starting point of the requirements. Okay? Remember that, so one thing to note is that document analysis, you cannot sit down, analyze the document and get all of the requirements unless that document was created the day they gave it to you. As long as it's a dated requirement, some things might have changed, right? Since they created that document, maybe they have new processes, they've changed some of their processes, right? But it's a good starting point. It would even help you begin to formulate some of the questions you want to ask. Okay, such document can be documents that includes like user interface details, right? User manuals, things like that, right? If that information is in that document, it's in there for a purpose. Now we want to know, is this still relevant? When we build a new system, is this still relevant enough for us to build it in the new system? So an advantage of document analysis, and your company will provide the document to you, right? One advantage is that it provides, like I mentioned earlier, it's easy access to information, right? When you read at your own pace. It's different from when maybe you're interviewing multiple people and they're giving you valid information, but it's all coming at you so fast, right? With analyzing a document, you pace yourself, you go at your own speed. Okay, and because it's already documented, you can basically validate that it's still correct and lift it from there. Okay, disadvantages is the information may not be current, depending on how long ago the document was created. Even user interfaces might have changed. So let's say your company is moving from solution A to solution B, which is Salesforce, right? Some of the layout of the interface in the current system may still be relevant, but some of them may not anymore because they've changed it since the document was created and they've not necessarily gone back to update the document. Okay, and basically the information you're reading may not reflect what is needed in the new system, because after all, there is a reason why they're moving to a new system. Okay, then we have what we call reverse engineering. Typically, reverse engineering happens where there is no existing documentation on the current system, right? And maybe there are not that many people who know how the system was built, like the requirements that went into building the system. So what you do is you'd go into the system and you start figuring out how it works. Normally you gather requirements and you build the system. Now you go into the system and you try to figure out the requirements that was used to build the system. That's reverse engineering. Most companies do not do reverse engineering. So again, this is just something for you to know. It's one of the tools, out there, one of the ways in which requirements can be gathered. Not common at all, okay? Because how much can you, possibly know by going into the system and playing in the system? But the reason it's even used at all is that it is better than nothing. If all the people who were there during the implementation of the current system have left the company and somehow all of the documentation has been lost, right? Reverse engineering might be an option. Okay, joint application design is another tool, not commonly used because again, it's a heavy tool to use. So basically, joint application design, also known as JAD, is basically when the business, the BA is collaborating with stakeholders in, like, you might book a room and everybody is in the room, right? And through concerted effort, everybody working together, we're having a conversation. It's similar to what you'd have in a brainstorming session, right? Things are moving really fast. Requirements are coming. Usually the people in the room are people who really, really know the subject matter, right? And so that's why in this meeting, you bring in people who call subject matter experts, also known as SMEs. When you're inviting people into your workshop, brainstorming session, joint application design, make sure these are people who really, really know. Okay, because you're looking to them to be able to tell you what their processes are, what their requirements are. So they really need to know. And with a joint application design, things go really fast. Large amounts of information is being shared, and you, the BA, you're trying hard to keep up. Do I recommend joint application design to a BA who's just starting? No. Even seasoned BAs oftentimes will not do joint application design as the first meeting, because if you're new on a job, you're new on a job, right? You may have a lot of experience, but not necessarily within the context of this business. So I'd usually recommend less stress tools to start with, and then as you build your level of comfort with your subject matter experts, maybe your last meeting, you could make it a joint application design. Okay, the downsides of this is that it requires a lot of planning, because with joint application design, you're talking to a larger audience. So the scheduling, right? When A is available, B is not. When B is available, C is not. So scheduling can be a headache. Joint application design meetings are also long as 4 hours even, oftentimes, right? So that's a huge commitment on the part of your subject matter experts. That's like half a day of them being away from their own work. Okay, and it requires trained and experienced personnel for facilitation and recording, right? So if you have a scribe, fantastic, right? You're facilitating, your scribe is helping you record. Or if you don't have a scribe and you've told the people you're meeting with that you're going to be recording them, it's maybe, it's you bring in some type of recorder, you've told them you're going to record them, and you record them basically, right? But you're facilitating, driving the conversation. Because remember, when you go into that meeting, you're going with a purpose. You're not going to just have them talk for 4 hours. You have a set of requirements that you need to gather from them, whatever is in scope for your project. So stakeholders are known to go off tangents, your subject matter experts, right? Not deliberately, but the way they envision it in their mind is the way they're going to tell you, right? And so there is a lot of noise. And if the noise is getting too much, it's going to derail the meeting, it's going to waste time. And that's where your facilitation skill comes in. If you're talking about something that has nothing to do with why you're there, and that thing they're talking about, which is irrelevant, is lasting too long, you need to figure out a respectful way of redirecting the conversation back to why that joint application design is happening. Okay. So before we start lesson 7 today, because we definitely do have time to start that, I want us to talk about requirement gathering. Like, I'll just like to hear from a few people. If this is something you've done before, your job title may not have been BA, but in some capacity, like you work in customer service, right? And people phone in about something and you're talking to them, asking more questions. How have you gone about it? And of course, if you already work as a BA, how are you doing your requirement gathering today? What tools are you using? Maybe you even have a technique that I haven't thought, right? Because again, I don't have a monopoly of knowledge. I'd be really happy to hear a few people talk about it. Let's see what we have in here. Okay. Damilola, I saw your message. Okay. So let's see. Do we have any raised hands? I'm hoping to see more hands. Mobola, go ahead, please.
Hi, Abiola. Good evening. Thanks for the class. I actually have a question. I wanted you to clarify the difference between a workshop and the chat session. And as regards contribution, I had worked as Salesforce admin, and I had the business reaching out with requirements. And the easier way for me was to have one-on-one with them, interviews. And sometimes in order to see what they are doing and observe, I go on Teams meeting and connect with us so they're able to relay their pain points. And that was very, very easy on me. I once joined a workshop, but it was too hectic. It was too hectic. I was just glad I wasn't the only admin. So the role is like admin / BA. So that was what the role was like. So I was glad I wasn't the only one on call, but then the call was recorded. So I could always go back to the recordings and listen to them. But yeah, that's just it. Thanks.
Okay, good. So thank you for sharing that experience. How many stakeholders were you engaging on that?
In the bigger meeting.
No, when the business reached out to you, you said you did one-on-one with them. So how many people did you have to go with?
One-on-one. So usually head of that LOB, probably like 3-4 people. But at a point, I was only connecting with the director of that line of business. So once we're done with the user story, we just reconfirm that this is what he wants. And even when he wants reports and dashboards created, we do that in the lower environment and run it by him. So it was very easy for me that way. So yeah, maximum 3, most times maybe 1. But for the bigger workshops, they were like 20, 25, and that was very overwhelming because I'm very, very quiet. I don't like talking too much. So that was overwhelming for me.
Oh, and were you the only one working with them to gather the requirements?
No. That was why I said I was glad I wasn't the only BA on the call. The only admin on the call, yeah.
Okay, yeah, 25 is a big number. Like, even if I had to engage 25 people now, I think I would be tired is the thing, because talking to 25 people is a lot, right? So even if only half of them were talking, that is still a lot, and that's all information I would need to capture, right? So no, well done, and thank you for sharing that. You did ask a question before
Yeah,
if you
I
share
wanted
your
a
experience.
clarification
Yeah.
between workshop and JAD
And
session.
yes,
Mhm.
yeah. So let me answer that. A JAD, basically a joint application design sessions, right? They're like multiple workshops happening, right? The main difference is with a joint application design, those subject matter experts you're meeting with, they're involved in the design discussion. Okay, they're involved in, like obviously they're not the ones building it, but in terms of how we're going to design it, how we're going to develop it, it's usually sometimes people with some technical knowledge will be in there. Because remember, your stakeholders are not just business, right? But people who have in-depth knowledge about the subject matter. So joint application design is like a series of workshops where, we're just let me say it goes faster than your regular workshop. So with your regular workshop, you may have one or two, right? And you gather your requirement, usually a larger group, you gather your requirement. We're not necessarily doing like design or anything in there. Regular workshops are normal requirement gathering meetings, right? However, with a joint application design, right? Just like the name, joint application design, we're not just talking requirement, tell me your processes, even the design, we're having conversations about it. And then these meetings go a whole lot faster. Usually before you do a joint application design, you'd have had some workshops, which is why a joint application design is usually a series of workshops, right? So maybe the initial workshop, we're gathering requirements, you have the business in there. By the time you get to your joint application design, it may not be the regular business subject matter experts that are in there anymore. Your audience may have changed because again, chances are, your business people, like the end user who you're meeting together requirement from, they're not going to have design decision power. So while they may have been included in your regular workshop, you may not necessarily have them in your JAD meeting. The key difference that I want you to hold on to is the fact that a joint application design meeting, just like the name says, right, we're having design conversations in there as well. That's not something you do all the time. All of the other tools that I'm talking about, usually you're not having design or development conversations in there, apart from joint application design. Okay? Mobile, are you still there?
Thanks. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm there. Thanks. So would it be appropriate for like if you have like two lines of business that require a certain feature on a solution, but there is a conflict amongst the both of them, would JAD suffice to, work for them to come together and
Yeah,
pinpoint
so
whatever it is?
the fact that they have two like conflicting requirements, that may not be a design problem. A conflicting requirement is a conflicting requirement. It is not a conflicting design. A conflicting requirement is somebody says approval is required. The other person says approval is not required. That is not a design conversation. It is actually a conflicting requirement that needs to be resolved. It is one or the other. We cannot have both. Do you understand what I mean? That has nothing to do
Okay,
with
so that has
design.
to do with design. All right. Okay, understood. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. So before Olawale and Odunayo raised their hands, Priscilla, you raised your hand and you lowered it. I saw that hand before it went down. Do you still want to ask your question?
Yeah, that was a good catch though. I was just thinking in my head while we were speaking about JAG, if we could also refer to it as breakout sessions, like in simpler terms. Could that be, because I can imagine breakout sessions are like simpler, smaller meetings, like from the larger group where
Mhm.
specific conversations are had. They could be very technical. There could be discovery sessions. Yeah, so I was just wondering if it could
Yeah,
be a
so
similar term.
I wouldn't use it that way because even from a regular workshop, we could have breakout sessions, right? Breakout sessions are breakout sessions. You have a larger room. We want to hone in on the different topics that we have. We can have breakout rooms. So you could definitely use it. No, so actually, a JAG session, right? Like even if you had 10 people in there, you still want to keep them together. It's a design development type conversation we're having, right? The group of stakeholders you have in there how do I explain this? So I understand what you're
Yes.
saying about a breakout room. What I want to say about a breakout room is that it could apply to even a regular workshop. A JAD is not a breakout room. A JAD is a purposefully designed workshop that is different from a regular workshop that focuses on design and development conversations. So it's not a breakout from the original workshop. It's not like we
Okay.
did the original workshop and we're like, okay, these 5 people know a whole lot more. Let's do a breakout room and put them in there. No, a JAD in itself
Yeah.
is still like a regular workshop, just that the conversation is different from what you'd have in a regular workshop. The people you have in a JAD, the conversations you're having. In fact, the timing of a JAD, even because before we get to design, well, we need to know some things about the project, right?
Yeah.
So right, do you understand what I mean? So JAD has to do with timing, JAD has to do with content, JAD has to do with the level of technical encode that we're talking about here. So I wouldn't substitute JAD for, I wouldn't say JAD can also be called breakout room in this context, because breakout room is just breakout room, and we could make a breakout room
Yeah.
for many, really. Do you understand what I mean?
Yes, I do. Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you so much for taking our time to clarify that. I also
Yeah.
wanted to chime in on my experience with gathering requirements.
Oh, yes, please. I love to hear.
Yeah. So for me, I work as a PM, and in some capacity, I've had opportunities to gather requirements, and from my experience, it has been gathering requirements using Excel, like as pretty much as basic as that. And then after a while, we then transferred the requirements we had onto Jira. And kind of like monitored it in user story forms and even Confluence as well.
Yeah.
And we also use Google Sheets as well. And then when it comes to process maps, flows, and all of that, we use Visio. I have used Balsamic before but that was in a separate project, just to create a mock-up of a design on an iPad and what the stakeholders would see by the time we kind of like set up iPads for multiple users across the company, right? So yeah, that has majorly been my experience, and my tools have been pretty much basic, apart from invocating the use of Visio, Lucid Chat, Jira, Confluence, and all those tools. But yeah.
Awesome. That is great experience. I find it interesting you called it basic. What more did you expect to use? I mean, the life of a BA isn't complicated. For your requirement gathering, you mentioned something. You started with Excel and then your company moved to Jira. You know that even if your company had Jira from day one, you're not going to be in those requirement meeting, gathering requirement and typing it into Jira. In any case, you're going to type it into Excel, type it into Microsoft Word, and then you will take the time on your own to go put it into Jira. I think that the experience you have is really, really great. You've used Visio. I'm actually going to be showing Visio in class. That's another tool. Like I will do an actual mapping in class so you can see what process mapping is about. Priscilla mentioned it, and I'm glad she did. I think it'd be maybe lesson 8 or lesson 9. And what is Visio? It's a tool that you use to map out the processes that have been shared with you. You remember when you went to the marketing manager and you said, tell me your lead generation process, and they tell it to you. They walk you step by step. In fact, let me use another example that people can easily imagine. You going to the ATM, insert card into ATM request PIN number, all of that, right? It's a narrative, it's a process. I could write it out, lines 1 to 20 for you, what would happen, at each step. And that same narrative, that story we've written, we could draw it out. One of the more popular tools is called Visio, and that's what I'm saying that I will show in class. You almost can't get away with like Visio. There are other tools that that you could use for process mapping as well. But the Visios, the Lucid charts, right? You can't get away with using it. Chances are you can. So I'd like to be able to show in class. I know Visio has a trial version. So once I show it in class, I'd encourage everybody, please just go online and start mapping out. Map out your process for cooking at home. Map out your process for anything. You're only doing it to get comfortable with mapping, right? So when you get on the job, you feel comfortable doing it. But thanks a lot, Priscilla, for sharing that. Olawale, go ahead, please.
Okay, thank you, Abiola. I just wanted to, share my experience with the context. I also work as a BA, and in the course of my career, I've used interviews, documents, analysis, focus groups in gathering requirements. And my approach to gathering requirements is usually, the first step starts with eliciting requirements, then I analyze and document. Thereafter, I verify and validate. So irrespective of the technique I use, it still ends up with some level of interviews at some point. For example, I worked on a recent project where the stakeholders were like group of 9, and they shared the task, between themselves in providing me with documents, to they provided me with documents, so that I can analyze those documents and then document my requirement from there. So in that specific case, what I did was, after documenting my requirements in terms of user stories, I ended up setting up individual meetings one-on-one with those stakeholders so that I can walk them through, and have like an interview to validate those requirements. So that was what I wanted to share. And also, there's also been focus groups. I'm not sure if you've mentioned that. Just a group of specific team or few people, where they can, provide requirements regarding any specific process. I've also been a part of large workshops and business process reviews. I didn't facilitate those, but I was a member of the panel or team, and I did learn, a bit about how to manage such crowd, from the more experienced team members. So that was what I wanted to add.
Thank you so much, Olawale. Like, that is fantastic. That is a ton of experience. I have a question for you. So you mentioned about 4 or 5 different tools you've used. How did you choose one tool for a particular meeting? I mean, knowing that you have the ability, you know how to use all 5 of them. How did you choose to go with focus group compared to document review, for example?
Okay, so in the specific projects where I use document analysis, I was not familiar with the business at all. I was like newer person in the organization, and the process itself was about permits. I work with the government, so it was about permitting system, and I didn't know anything about it. So the best approach in that circumstance was, and the objective or the goal of the project was, to build a new system. So a system I'm not familiar with. So what I did with the team was, okay, go document me your process, what you do. Like I said, it was a big stuff, and between like 9 stakeholders, they divided their task among themselves. They took a bit, of all the pieces, and they provided me with Word and PDF documents, step by step of their interactions with the system. So from those interactions, I was able to write out, user stories from there, and then thereafter it was just to now validate and, have an interview with them, where I could ask more questions, and of course, using the root cause analysis to dig deep and ask more whys. So that was my approach on that.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. So I wanted to highlight something you said, right? When you joined, you didn't know anything about the business. And what did you do? You looked to the business to give you information that you could start with. I was hoping you'd say that, and you did. The reason why that's important is, again, people ask me a lot, how do I start? Like, this is my day one. I don't know what they do. I don't know who they are. I don't know. The way you know is by asking. I always say it's okay for you not to know at the beginning. What is not okay is 3 months into the job, you still don't know. And if 3 months into the job, you still don't know, why could that be? Because you're not asking the right questions, or you're not asking the right people. So don't feel threatened, don't feel too anxious because you don't know. I mean, It's your day one there. You've never worked there. So it's okay for you not to know. Just ask the people who know. And if you don't know the people who know, you don't know who you should be asking, ask your PM. Like I always say, go to your PM first. Your PM doesn't know. Your PM should be able to get you one or two people you can start with. Start asking them questions and you continue to build your knowledge base. One day you'd wake up and you're like a pro already. You know enough of the business to be able to have a conversation with them. So thanks a lot for that. Odunayo.
Hi.
Hi,
Okay,
your
so
hand is raised.
yeah, sorry. My question was about, sorry, I'm taking us back about the judge session. So is it safe to say it's as much as about solutioning and gathering requirements at the same time?
Yeah,
Like
so
finding a solution and gathering the requirement at the same time. Which one would you say it leans more towards? Because you mentioned something about subject matter experts in the room as well, just trying to like build a design. So what would you say is more
yeah.
about?
So in any tool that you choose to use, you're going to be working with subject matter experts. It doesn't really matter whether it's JAD, right? Subject matter experts are experts in the subject. So even if you were having an interview, you want to talk to an expert in the subject. I just wanted to clarify that first. Regardless of the tool, you should be talking to subject matter experts, not people who know, just enough. People who know the process really well, which would be your subject matter experts, right? In your JAD session, right, you're talking design, you can talk requirements as well. It doesn't, what differentiates a JAD session is not whether or not you talk about requirement. It's more the fact that there is conversation around design where typically with all the other tools, you wouldn't have conversation about design. So if it's an opportunity to talk about requirements, I mean, if you're missing requirements and people in the room can give you requirement, by all means, they're no hard and fast rule to these tools and how you choose to use them. Understand the overall purpose of, okay, with this tool, this is how I use it, right? But the content of the conversation in a JAD, primarily, we're having conversations about design, but like nobody is going to say, oh, why would you talk about requirements? If there is a need to talk about the requirement, we will talk about the requirements in that meeting as well.
Okay,
Do you
thanks.
understand what I mean, Odunayo? You're like, there's no limit to, oh, no, we can't talk about requirement because it's a JAD session, but just understand the purpose of the JAD session, right? And oftentimes you're not going to even use a JAD session. I have to mention, it shouldn't be what you're running to as a BA. You should be using all the other tools that we talked about because, again, how much does the BA know about design and development realistically? Right? If you're having a JAD session, I'd even encourage you to have a technical person on your team in there, maybe one of the developers or your solution architect, somebody who actually understands design. Anyway, did I answer your question, Otumayo, or did I completely deviate? Are you there?
Yes, I'm here. I think you did, but then so you know what we're talking about JAD when we're talking about requirements gathering, right? So are you saying now it's about more of, sorry.
Sorry, can
Would
you
you
repeat
say
that?
okay, so now we're talking about requirement gathering techniques. So
Yeah.
that's why we got to JAD, right?
Mm-hmm.
So now you mentioned like, so are you saying JAD is more about design?
Yeah, so JAD is more like, even if you try to Google it now, right? Just try to Google it and see what, because I also want you to hear from someone else, right? JAD, like the name, right? Joint Application Design. It's usually more technical conversation than you'd have in a workshop. Otherwise, just do a workshop if requirements is all you're trying to gather, right?
Okay,
But
I understand.
yeah, so do you understand what I mean? Because you have the regular workshop that I first talked about, right? That's the normal requirement gathering meeting. We're not talking design, we're not talking development in there. Okay?
Thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem. Bayo, I think that's the last hand we have raised, and then we'll continue. Go ahead, please, Bayo.
Yeah, good evening, Abiola.
Good evening.
I want to ask a silly question, okay? And I really want you to help me out here. I mean, I've had you talk about tools, since I joined, today. I've had, Jira, Visio. I mean, I'm just hearing tools here and there. Is it possible, okay, to assist someone like myself, who is, venturing into, the entire BA, for the very first time, with like, say, maybe a document where I'm just able to see the major tools and what it's used for. Just like a summary, so that when you guys are talking, I'm able to have a mental, I'm able to process it mentally to say, okay, when you're talking about Jira, I know what you're trying to talk about, something like that. Yeah.
Okay, so I think that what would be better for you is to actually see the tool, not a document, which is why I said that I'm going to show you Visio in class. I'm not just going to show you the tool, I'm going to use it. I'm going to ask somebody in class to walk me through a process. I don't care what the process is, just walk me through any process. And I'm going to document it and I'm going to map it out with Visio so you can see it live. My expectation after that is that you then sign up for the free version of Visio and you try out what I'm showing you in class. So that's what we're going to do. I think that is better than giving you a document. Now I can give you, we've talked about two tools here, Visio and Jira, nothing more. Really from a tool. Oh yeah, we talked about Balsamic. You're
Yeah,
right.
exactly.
So we talked about Balsamic, we talked about Jira, and we talked about Visio. With Balsamic, I can go check to see if there's a free version of it. If there's no free version of it, I can have a conversation with Blackforce to see what they're willing to do there. But as far as I remember, Blackforce shows Jira. I can have a chat with Babs Kenki about that. I don't think he's on the call. But I hear what you're saying, Bayo. I'll make a note here. So Jira, Balsamic, and Visio. I know that I'm going to be walking you through Visio because I think that is very, very important, right? Jira is very important as well. And we can show you Jira in 1 hour. I'll have a chat with Babs Kenki and see what we can do there. I can't really promise you anything on Balsamic, but I'll look into it. In the meantime, though, you could also just go on YouTube and look at videos on how to use it. Especially the Balsamic, right? Because Balsamic is really a drawing tool. Like if I were to create an image of Balsamic and somebody else who's more artistic were to create it, theirs will probably be better than mine. But let me take Jira away. I know I'm going to be showing you Visio. Maybe, if not tomorrow, it'll be sometime next week. So don't worry about that one. Jira, I'll have a chat with Babs Kenki to see what we can do to show it to the team. And then Balsamic, I'll look into it to see what we can do about that as well. But I hear what you're saying. I understand, that if you see the tool, then now you've seen it, you can imagine what you can do with it. I hear what you're saying. I'll look into that. In any case, there was already a plan to show you Visio, and I'm going to go ahead and do that. Okay. So those are the three tools, right? Jira, Balsamic, and Visio. The other
I also
thing,
had Lucid.
yeah,
someone
so
said
Lucid,
Yeah.
Lucid chart is like Visio. So it's almost like saying, show me Google Sheet and show me Microsoft Word. We're not going to do that, right? We show you one, and then, do you understand what I mean? These are tools that do the same thing. When we show you one, then you're good. Even if you try to use the other one, you at least have an idea of how to use it. Do you understand what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, the three main ones we've talked about so far, the Jira, Balsamic, and Visio. Any other one I think is just, oh yeah, this tool also does what Jira does. Like Jira is not the only one that does what Jira does, right? And for all we know, you get to a company and they don't even use Jira, they use another one. But once we've shown you Jira, it would be easy for you to get a hang of the other tool. Okay, so I'll take that feedback away. Thank you for speaking. I'm sure you spoke for a lot of people tonight through that comment. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see. Ayokumi said, thank you, Bayo, for that question. You see, I hadn't even seen Ayokumi's comments before I knew that you spoke with a lot of people. And Victoria said, Balsamic has 30 days free trial. Okay, that's good. Thank you for that, Victoria. Dolapo said you could also use LinkedIn Learning. Yeah, even I still use LinkedIn Learning today. LinkedIn Learning has a ton of resources, and you can get it free as well for anybody who doesn't already know. And you'd be able to learn these tools. Okay, awesome. We need to keep going here, just so we can cover more ground today. So thank you for all the feedback, all the contributions, for sharing your experience. If I were someone in class right now with not a lot of experience, and a few people have spoken up who actually work as BAs, you may want to start chatting with them and asking them more questions, right? Leverage on their experience. If they're working as a BA, it means they scaled the interview, right? How did they do the interview? You know, they can share some of those with you, and that will be part of your learning, your learning process, basically. Okay, so we're on lesson 7. In lesson 7, we're going to be talking about the requirement life cycle management. So earlier in the training, I mentioned the fact that when you gather a requirement, that is not the end of the requirement. You don't say, hoo, I've gathered the requirement, I've done my job. You want to follow that requirement throughout the life cycle of the requirement. You know, at some point, did we say this requirement is irrelevant, so we're not building it? Or if it's a requirement that we have to build because it's a must-have, has it been built? Has it been tested? Does it have any bugs? If it has bugs, have the bugs been fixed? Okay, is the code clean? Like, is it ready for deployment, basically? And that is you, the BA, following the requirement through the life cycle. Of course, it doesn't mean that every day you're going to take every requirement and like, what point is this requirement now? No, that's not what we're saying. What we're saying is that, for example, if your company was using Jira, all of those requirements will be in Jira. And when you log into Jira, you can see the status of all the requirements you've put in there, right? If a requirement is in development, well, the expectation is that next it will go to QA for it to be tested, right? And if that requirement is just stuck in development forever and ever, you, the BA, you want to inquire, like, why is this requirement not moving? Okay, so today we're going to talk about tracing your requirements, maintaining them, prioritizing them, assessing any changes to requirements, and then getting the requirements approved. Okay, so again, the life cycle basically talks about what you, the BA, need to do through the lifetime of that requirement. That's what we're saying here. So tracing requirements. You want to ensure that your requirements speak to one another. As you continue to gather requirements, sometimes you get requirements that will contradict the requirement you got 3 months ago. The way you're going to, how would you know that there's a contradiction? Because remember, you gathered it 3 months ago, is by keeping those requirements top of mind. Fact that you gathered the requirement, they worked on it a month ago, you shouldn't forget about that requirement. Once you fully understand these requirements anyway, because from gathering to verifying to validating, it's being built, it's in QA, you, the BA, you'd have read over that requirement multiple times that I think you just remember it. Hopefully you would, right? And so all we're saying here is that we want our requirements to be aligned. If somebody gives you a requirement that contradicts something that was said before, obviously you want to have that conflict resolved. You want to talk to the 2 people that gave you the requirement. And sometimes even the same person who will give you conflicting requirements. Catching the conflicting requirements is your responsibility as a BA. Okay, so we want to make sure that our requirements are aligned. We have what we call forward traceability and backward traceability. Okay, with forward traceability, we're tracing a requirement back to design, right? Usually design happens before requirement, because design is how we're going to build this. What is it going to look like? Design isn't really how is it going to behave. Okay, so if we had the design, remember we have like the joint application design or whatever type of design. Joint application design is not the only place where we talk about design. You know, you have your solution architects on some projects, right? You have your developers. They talk about design, they talk about development, not within the context of the joint application design necessarily. They can have their own meetings and talk about design. Okay? Maybe what the eventual user interface would look like, how 2 pages are going to interact with one another, conversations like that, right? So when you gather your requirements, if a design conversation that happened a while ago, which now you're seeing the document, right? You've seen the document, you know, you understand it. It's not code, it's design, right? And now you have a requirement and there's red flags. You're like, this requirement, we're not going to be able to implement it based on this design, right? The way you've come to that conclusion is because you've done a forward traceability to look back at the design. Now, is there an expectation that as a BA, you take design documents every day and you'll be looking at it? Not necessarily, but sometimes because you're part of certain conversations, I think it was one of the people who spoke now, who talked about the fact that he was in a meeting where he was not the one leading. So you're going to attend meetings where you're not the one leading. It may be a design conversation happening, and people are going to ask questions, and you come to understand what it is they're talking about. Okay, so we have forward traceability, and then we have backward traceability. Okay, and this is where you're tracing the requirement back to its source. Sometimes, right, we've gathered the requirement, we've built it, and then we have a defect, right? And from that defect, another requirement has emerged. Okay, we want to be able to, at any point in time, identify the source of a requirement. Is this requirement based on design, or is it based on a requirement that you got from your subject matter expert, or maybe a legal requirement? For example, if you're working in healthcare, there are policies that govern healthcare. One of them is called HIPAA. In healthcare, you also have what we call PII, which is personally identifying information or so, right? Meaning there's certain ways that data must be managed. So you may have requirements that come from that. So that's not a requirement from your end user. No, it is just a legal requirement or a policy requirement, something like that. So at any point in time, you as the BA, you should be able to tell us the source of your requirement. Again, it's not that people are going to come to you and say requirement 53, can you tell me who gave you that requirement? Nobody is going to really do that. Unless somebody finds a requirement that makes absolutely no sense, they may be like, where did you get this requirement, right? So typically, people are not going to ask you that question, but you need to know the source of that requirement. Who gave you the requirement? What was the context of the requirement, basically? Because and one of the reasons why you need to do that is we'll get to a point in the project where time is limited. We have 10 requirements left. We can only build 5. How do we begin to determine which 5? So initially, we classified all of them as must-have. But given the constraint now, are there some of these requirements that we could push post-implementation, maybe immediately after go live, right? And we want to start having those conversations. If one of those 10 requirements is a legal requirement that cannot be pushed, we need to know, right? And who are we going to ask? You, the BA. Okay, so I'll give you an example. I think I used that example in the past where we were putting data in the cloud, right? It was within the health insurance, so insurance sector, and the data, the company that we were going to use, I can't remember if it was Amazon now. We had to do, some security assessments to see if we could actually give them our data just based on where their servers are. So even though their servers are within Canada, they route the information through the US. So that information is eventually stored in Canada, but it goes from Canada to the US back to Canada. That project died. The entire project died because of that. The company already engaged vendors, we're already paying vendors, but because that requirement was not captured on time, and then by the time we did the security assessment, and they're like, absolutely not, you cannot do that. The project died, basically. So you can see the importance of, once you have your requirement, tracing it. Number one, the requirement has to be complete. If there's a legal requirement for something, we need to know what it is, right? So you, the BA, you need to gather that requirement. And then we need to know that this requirement has to be absolutely done. It's a must-have. If we don't do it, we can't go live with the project, right? And at any point in time, if anybody asks you, what is the source of this requirement, you should be able to trace it back to design or trace it back to any other source if the source is not designed. Okay, so here is a sample of a traceability matrix. Again, this is just an idea. I'm not saying this is what it must look like, okay, for tracing your requirement. And you can see what information do we have on here? We have the requirement ID, the description, the objective, who requested it, the status of the requirement, right? We have the test status, has it passed testing or not? Usually, these documents are a bit more elaborate than this, right? But it captures, critical information about the requirement, so that if anybody was looking at this requirement and they see maybe a requirement by the company CEO, okay, chances are that's a must-have, right? Okay, so your company's version of this document may be different from what's on here. This is just an image from the internet, but I hope you understand the idea of what you need to capture. In fact, I hope you understand the purpose of your requirement traceability matrix. The next thing we're moving on to is maintaining the requirement. So we want to maintain for accuracy and consistency. Now you've gathered this requirement. We're doing sprint planning session. You're having a conversation with your technical, like the rest of the development team, and it's just not adding up. Like before you came into the meeting, it made sense to you. But now that they're asking you questions about it, you're just not able to answer. It's all not making sense anymore. You may need to take it back to the business, right? And then have a conversation with them. And maybe that user story may be edited just based on the new information you have. Okay, so you've had a conversation with them, they've given you more information. You're going to go back and you're going to maintain the requirement by editing it to reflect that new information that your team needs for them to be able to build. Okay, so at any point in time, a requirement needs to be accurate and it needs to be consistent. When you change a requirement or you modify it based on new information, you also need to check, now that I've modified this requirement, is it conflicting with any other requirement based on the change that I've made? Okay, so second point here, when new requirements have been approved, the existing approved requirements and design need to be checked to be sure they do not conflict with the new ones. And so that is the mindset you want to have. It's a good thing that your requirement list is growing, but you need to watch for conflicts. I mean, eventually, if you don't catch the conflict, chances are your developers will catch it. But then it doesn't look good on you. Because when the developers are going to talk about it, they're going to talk about it in the sprint planning meeting or in some meeting where some of your stakeholders may even be in, right? So if anybody's catching the conflict, I think the best person to catch it is you. That's the best scenario for you. But if other people catch it, it is what it is, right? It's not like because they found one conflict, they're going to say you're a terrible BA. But if you give it enough thought, spend enough time with the requirements, read over requirement. Don't say, oh, I'm done documenting, I'm not going to read over it, right? You may be able to find, you most likely will be able to find conflict if there's any. So now we're moving on to prioritizing your requirements. You want to rank your requirements. So we talked about must go, right? Must have, should have, could have, won't have this time. You want to prioritize your requirement because you do not have, you do not have all the money in the world and you do not have all the time in the world. So in the time and money and risk, like human resources that we have, we will build, the functionality that is a total must have. And the way we're going to know that is that you have to first prioritize it. Okay? When you prioritize, we know what is urgent. We know what is a prerequisite for the next one. There's some requirements that you can't implement until you implement another set of requirements, right? So there is a dependency. We know urgency, we know dependency, we know all the critical things, right? And that way we're able to build in a logical sequence, not building the relevant thing first. And we've spent like 3 months and now we're moving to the important ones. And how do you do this prioritization? You work with the business. The business know, like the stakeholders or the subject matter experts you're working with, they are the ones who know what is critical to their business, right? So when you start out, they're going to tell you everything is a must-have, but you need to figure out a way to tell them, I understand you'd like to have all of these requirements implemented, but if we're able to implement, of these 10 requirements that have to do with, for example, login, if we're able to deliver only half of them, which 5 would it be? Or if we're going to order them according to the level of importance, so don't give them the impression you're not going to build half of it, but like let's list them in order of importance. Now they themselves, they prioritize it for you. So depending on the person you're talking to, you just need to figure out how to phrase it so they tell you what is most important. It is not your place to determine what is most important to them. Some prioritization is also done by the development team, especially the people developing or configuring the system, especially if it has to do with dependency. So it doesn't matter that the business said 1 is more important than 2. If 1 can't be built if 1 cannot be built logically before 2 is Okay, I think I said that backwards. Let's say the business tells you of these 3 requirements, A is the most important. But when you talk to the development team, they tell you, if we don't build B, we can't build A. Well, B just became the most important from a building standpoint. Okay. So we've looked at Moscow before, right? Or did I make that up? Because it's coming up again. Have I mentioned Moscow in class before? Can anybody let me know?
Yes, you mentioned it yesterday.
Yes. I did, right? Okay. Thank you. So, well, I'm sure someone will benefit from hearing it again. So in Moscow, right? MO is must, the S is should, the C is could, and W is won't have this time. What are the must-have requirements? Must-have requirements. These are requirements that are fundamental to the solution we're building. Without them, we basically wasted time and money. Okay? We have to deliver whatever has been considered must-have. Then we have the should-have. These are important requirements that we could find a workaround for in the short term. Or if we had a bit more money or a bit more time, they will become must-haves. But given the fact that we don't have money to build them right now, we don't have the time, and we can find a workaround, right? Then they become should-haves. We will still be able to use the solution if we don't build it. Then we have the could have. These requirements have little or no impact if not delivered. And you begin to wonder, why is the business even giving me a could have requirements? Because when they were giving you the requirements in their mind, everything was a must have. To them, everything is always the must have. It is when you begin to have those conversations with them that they will now begin to consider and say, okay, we can do without this one for now, right? And then we have the won't have this time. Okay, these are requirements that can wait till later. You're still going to keep them on the list, right? Because they may be very useful in the next phase if there's going to be a next phase, right? They may be the must-haves for phase 2. You may even need them to be able to make some design decisions. So you won't ever delete requirements, right? But we're still going to categorize them as won't have this time. So let's look at an example here. The ability to be able to view your bank balance, is it a must-have or a could have? Imagine you banking with Bank of America or Royal RBC, and you can't log in to view your balance. To know your balance, you have to phone them or you have to go into the branch. I think you will close that account and go to another bank, right? That is a must-have. Having a secure bank account is a must-have. Being able to view your history for more than 6 months, maybe some will argue it's a must-have, others may say, well, it's a should-have. But you cannot, maybe you would agree or disagree with me that viewing more than 6 months history, so on the screen, I'm not talking about your bank statement because you're going to get your bank statement anyway. But when you log into RBC on your phone, right, it doesn't automatically just show you 6 months history, right? If it did, it would be good, but it doesn't. And you can understand how that won't be must have, like view your bank balance. Like view your bank balance is non-negotiable. Being able to see your balance in pounds and euros is a could have. Like without that, your bank account is still working. It's a bank account. As long as you can see your bank account, your bank balance, your account balance, as long as you can see it in Canadian dollars, that's all that really matters. All of these extras, they're just extras. Availability in various languages, could have. Notify customer of all credits. In this case, anyway, we put it as a won't have this time, right? If somebody makes a deposit into your bank account, do you always get notified? Like if this wasn't Interact and they made a deposit, maybe you do, maybe you don't. Would you put that on the same level as being your bank account? Probably not. So you can see the logic that goes into how to determine what's a must-have and all of that. And then bear in mind again that it is not your decision to make. You're going to work with the end users or your subject matter experts to prioritize the requirements. Okay? And then we assess requirement changes During the lifetime of the requirement, changes may come. Oh, Abiola, the meeting I had with you 2 weeks ago, I just have, I just remember something that I missed, and what I remembered is actually going to impact what I already told you. That can be a source of a change requirement. Another one is new laws and regulations in your industry, right? So there are multiple sources of changes to requirements. New technology, new people, there's a new stakeholder that has been added to your stakeholder group. They have new information. All these things may lead to change. What you as a BA want to do is, what impact will this change have? Is this change a change to a requirement that we already implemented 3 months ago? That is different from if we're currently implementing the requirement. And that is different to a requirement that we haven't even started working on yet. If it's a requirement that we haven't started working on yet, best scenario, right? Because we're not having to redo or undo anything. But if this is a part of the solution we built 3 months ago, and now we have new information, and that new information totally disrupts what we've built, that is a greater impact, right? So we need to assess, what does this change mean? What impact will it have? Is it going to require more development and testing time? Does it have the potential to introduce bugs into the system? Okay, we need to analyze what that change means. So we want to assess the potential effect of the change to the solution value, right? Does this proposed change introduce conflict to the requirement? Does it have a potential to introduce bugs into what we already built? Will it make the solution more valuable? Can we choose not to implement? Like, if we don't implement the change, what will it mean to the business? Okay, we also want to make sure that this change still aligns with all of the requirements that we've gathered before, and that it is actually within scope. Because they may give you new information, vital information, but it's out of the scope of what we're talking about. So we'll document the change, but we're going to park it for now. We're not going to work on it. Okay, and see here, we want to check the impact, impact to time, impact to resources. Is it going to derail our team? Is it going to make people work longer hours? Conversations around that, right? So you're going to analyze it. You're going to share your outcomes with your project manager, right? Because if this is going to be a big impact, the project manager is going to take it to the powers that be to say, well, if we want to implement this change, because it's on the business, they should have told us this 3 months ago. They're bringing it up now. This is going to increase our development time by 1 month, meaning now you have to pay BA for 1 more month, developer for 1 more month, QA for 1 more month, right? If something like that is going to happen, that's a conversation that needs to be had with maybe the project sponsor or the executive committee. Typically, the PM would be the one to have that conversation, but the PM would rely on you to help them do the analysis that would, where he or she's going to get the information that they're going to share in that meeting. Okay, and then we want to handle the change request under the proper change management process, right? So we talked about change management earlier in this training. Every company has their own defined path for managing change. It may be that there is a change document that must be filled out, and then it will be given to the BA. The BA will analyze it for impact. The BA will share with the PM. The PM will share the result of that analysis with the executive management. That may be the process your company is following. Okay. If this is a very small change, major impact, if your company has a change manager or even the PM may be able to give initial approval, right? But if it's a bigger change with a bigger impact, because nobody wants that responsibility hanging on their neck, right? If the PM runs out of money, the PM doesn't want it to be their own fault. They ran out of money. So they want to loop in the higher ups, right? So the PM decides when to take the conversation higher or when they can make a decision. And give the BA the go-ahead or the development team the go-ahead that is needed. Okay, business analysts will help stakeholders understand the impact the change request will have on the organization. So once you've done that impact, right, what if we implement this change, it's going to lead to A, B, C, right? You communicate that to the project manager, but let's say you do the analysis and you realize that this is going to lead to a conflict. Right? It's going to conflict. Well, even though the business is still the one coming to you with this new information, but they're not thinking about what they told you 3 months ago. You, the BA, you're thinking about it, right? So let's say it's going to introduce a conflict. You tell them and say, well, so which is it? what you told me 3 months ago or what you're telling me now. Of course, you tell them in a nicer way, but that's the message you're trying to pass across to them. Or if we know that this is going to negatively impact the project, impact the organization, we can have that conversation with the business as well. Okay? So when changes to requirements are requested, a business analyst will analyze, is this a defect or a change? What's a defect? The new information they're giving you is not really new information. It's information for you to fix what wasn't built properly, right? So it's not every time they come to you with what they call a change that's actually really a change. And as a BA, you need to analyze it to know what it is. If it's a defect, it's on you and your team to fix it anyway. But if it's a change, then we want to make sure we do the analysis to understand the impact. Okay, we want to know how long it will take to implement that change, how much more hours are we going to need, right? And then you want to help your stakeholders to go through the change request process. Like I mentioned earlier, if there's a document they need to fill out, that change they're telling you verbally, your company may say all changes must be documented. So you give them the document, they fill it out, and then that is what you will use to do your analysis, right? Once you've added your own information based on impact to timeline, impact to resources and all of that, give it to the PM, right? Or if the PM says, no, go ahead and share it with the approvers, you can go ahead and share it with the approvers. Okay, and then once the approvers approve or deny it, you can communicate the outcome, that decision to the business, and then you save the change request with other project documents wherever your company saves it. Example would be SharePoint. And the last one here is approve requirements. So the BA does not approve requirements, right? The BA would seek to obtain approval and agreement on requirements and design. Usually, there is somebody or a few people that would approve requirements. If you don't know who they are, right, ask your PM, ask the people that you got the requirement from. So what I mean is, let's say that you gathered this requirements from the marketing manager and his team. It may be the director of marketing who would actually approve it. There's a project I'm working on now that the HR directors are the ones who provide approval, but oftentimes the HR directors are not even in the meeting. When they can, they attend the meeting. But the other people in the meeting do not have approval power. So once the meeting is done, I gather all the requirements. I then send an email to the HR director. I copy all the other people that I gathered the requirement from and say, this is the outcome of the meeting. I am seeking your approval. So know the right person to obtain approval from and make sure you get approval before you start building. Okay, if you're working in an agile environment, remember you're working in sprints, right? So you may have this set of requirements you're going to get approval for, and then later on you have another set of requirements, right? Depending on, again, how you and your team are gathering the requirement, what your timeline looks like. The key here is always get approval on requirement before they're built, so that nobody comes back in the future and says, so yeah, we gave you the requirement, but you don't want them to question who approved it. Like, did someone with approval power approve it? Not necessarily the person who gave you the requirement. That's what I'm highlighting here. Don't always feel that the person you get that requirement from is the one with approval power. In fact, I'll say more often than not, they're not the ones. The people who gave you the requirement, they're not the ones with approval power. So find out who that person is and get the approval. So this is the last slide we're going to go over today. Next class, we're going to start with current state, future state, and that's where I'm going to show you how to use Visio. It may take us about 2 days to finish that, but we definitely get to it. It's an interesting topic, I think, at least based on, how people begin to, even people who have been quiet in class start talking when we get to lesson 8. So I'm looking forward to that. Okay, we have about 15, 20 minutes for discussions here, questions, comments, anything that we want to talk about. Kende, go ahead, please.
Thanks, Abiola, for your class. It's really a great one. My question is this concerning requirement gathering. How do you, as a BA, gather requirements, or do you actually gather requirements from users, I mean customers?
Yes, I do. So Okay, let me hear you out.
Oh,
Abiola.
that's just a question. How do you gather it? Because I know we keep talking about workshops, we keep talking about interviews and all
Yeah.
that.
So
Yeah.
when you say end customers, what are you referring to? Internal or external?
External.
Oh, external customers. Yeah.
Yes.
So that doesn't typically happen. Gathering requirement from external customers, it's not the norm, right? Like chances are you use an Android or Apple phone. How many times have they come to gather requirement from you? Do you understand what I mean? It's not typical that your company may have, you know, external customers that use your service, right? But if you were in that rare situation where your company actually wanted to gather requirement from external stakeholders, they may have a focus group, right? Reach out to customers, a few customers, and get feedback. Or some of these requirements would even come directly from like customer feedback. So a customer calls about something, right? And that person who's talking to them is wearing the hat of a BA and having a conversation with them and asking questions. In my experience, how many times, anyway, typically I work on government projects and government doesn't come and meet anybody to ask how you feel about it or how you want it. Now, that's not to say they don't have the customers. They still have the customers, right? Like when I worked in a health authority, the system we're building it to manage employees, right? So the employees were the customers in that context. So do you understand what I mean? But I'm just trying to think if anybody in class has worked with, done an external facing requirement
Yeah.
where they're talking to customers, I will be happy to hear from them. But I'll tell you, kind of, it is not typical. Like Shopify does not phone people and
Yeah.
gather requirement from them. Do you understand what I mean?
Yeah.
That's not how it works.
My question generates from my own view. I'm a nurse, so I kind of looking at apps that patients kind of use to make appointments and all that.
Yeah,
And
okay.
I was wondering that just the way you're thinking about it, that's how I'm thinking about it too. That
Yeah.
how do we get
Yeah.
information from?
Yeah, so I know that there is a BA that I worked with. I trained, and now she's working as a BA in a health authority. And she was working on a project but I think that the users were physicians, right? And she was talking to me. She had questions that she needed my help with, right? And based on the conversation she was having with me, what they were building, I could gather that it was based on feedback from the physicians. It was the feedback from the physicians they were using as a baseline for the changes they were going to make in the system. Did they phone physicians to have a conversation with them? Probably not. And again, like I said, I don't think it's the norm. But Sophie, I think Sophie has the answer to what we're looking for. Sophie, go ahead, please.
Hi. Thank you for your teaching today. That was awesome. So I just wanted to add to her question, right, about how to grab or do like a requirement gathering based on external customers, because I work in the brand and marketing thing. So I was saying, like, obviously, you might have to seek approval from maybe the marketing, if there's a department or, like the VP market, all that kind of thing. And there are certain platforms where they can do like customer survey, right? So if there's a process that needs to be changed based on the customer, external customer, how they see maybe the user experience, how they see what the customer journey is like, how the platform is easy access to sign in, log in, and get details. They can do like customer survey, but they'll have to work with like the marketing department. The BA will have to work with the marketing department but the BA will have to do the requirement gathering, maybe ask the questions that will be on the survey, and then that way they can now send it, and then they send them all the details and they can gather the requirements.
Yeah, so that's a very good one, Sophie. Thank you for mentioning it. I do agree that's a valid way of gathering the requirement. But remember what we talked about survey and questionnaires, right? Because if your questionnaire is complicated, number one, nobody's going to fill it, right? So usually with your survey and questionnaires, you're looking for short form answers, or you're looking for like yes or no, things like that, right? Not detailed enough to be able to build any system, but a good starting point. Okay, so just something to bear in mind. How many times
Yeah.
have you received surveys yourself and you didn't even fill it out? You just closed it, right? So, but I'm glad you mentioned that. That is definitely one way of doing it. But going back to what I said, it's not mainstream, right? Apple feels like they know what's best for you. They build it and you use it. You don't do the updates, your phone crashes, is on you. So a lot of companies, they do enough research to know what's best for their customer, and then they include the feedback they receive from customers, general feedback, right? Whether even through surveys or questionnaires, and then they use all of that to build a tool that works. So, but thank you for that, Sophie. I think that I'm just going to quickly look at, I don't know if the other is, and Damilola said, if a change request is not approved, is it stored in a repository or discarded? Stored. We never discard anything. We never discard anything. In fact, the people would even tell you that if they come back and say that requirement is no longer valid, don't delete it, just do a strike through. But you never discard anything. Priscilla said, in my experience, I store it in a repository. Yes, absolutely. Store it. Because remember, you spent time working on it. If you keep discarding and discarding, one day somebody is going to come to you and say, so what have you been doing in the last 6 months, right? Okay, what else do we have in here? Do we have any more raised hands? Let me see. People, now is the time to ask questions. It's piling up and it only gets busier from here. If there's anything you have a question about, please ask. Even if you think it's silly, like somebody said the other time, they have a silly question and the question turned out not to be silly. There are no silly questions. We're here to learn. If there's anything you're slightly confused about, you need more information, please ask me. That is why I'm here. Mobola, go ahead, please.
I just want to follow up with Damilola's question.
Okay.
I think you mentioned it also, but for every project there is in scope and out of scope. Will it be okay to keep such requirement that is now approved under out of scope? Or because when you said repository, where exactly? The repository is like a storage for everything. So what document exactly are you saving it as in the repository? Or is it okay to save it under out of scope for that project?
Okay, so let's give a real life example. Let's say this is a requirement, right? Or it is a change request. And the change request is out of scope. Make a note on it and say it's out of scope, but save it with the other change request. Because you're going to have a folder for change requests. If you want to have a subfolder, one in scope, the other one in scope, all well and good. The most important thing is we want to know that this change was requested and we want to know the status of the change. How you choose to present it is really left to you. Or maybe your company already has a way they like to present it by using subfolders. But what's most important is we want a record of it. And in that record, we want to know that it is out of scope. Because you don't want somebody going back and then actually working on it because the BA hadn't indicated that it is out of scope. Do you understand what I mean, Mobola? Okay, Mobola, are you there?
Yes, I do. Thanks.
Okay, no problem. Any other questions? I think somebody tried to unmute now and then they muted again. Does anybody have any other questions or comments or anything they want to share?
You have
Okay.
a question in the chat.
Oh, there's a question in the chat. Okay.
Yes.
Let's see. Oh, actually, there's a few comments. So Lovely said, I worked on a project where we actually went to meet customers to ask them requirements. So it does happen. Yeah, so that's that's been Lovely's experience, right? It happens. I think it's rare. In fact, in all the BAs I've engaged, I think Loveline will be the first person telling me that. But like I say never, right? The fact that I haven't experienced it doesn't mean it's not there. I wish Loveline will actually tell us about the actual experience, but that's okay. Priscilla said put it in the change request folder in SharePoint. Absolutely agreed. And she said rename the file and add out of scope. Yes, you have to indicate that somehow, that it is out of scope. Toshi said, is it the responsibility of the BA to prioritize the requirement for the product backlog? Is it the responsibility of the BA to prioritize? Do you mean to prioritize requirements in the product backlog? Toshi, is that what you're saying? Yes, Toshi said yes. So prioritizing requirement in the product backlog is typically the work of the product owner if there is one. If there is no product owner, you, the BA, will work with the business to prioritize. Because remember, when there's a product owner, the product owner is the face of the business in front of the technical team. But when there's no product owner, you, the BA, are working directly with the business. So you work with the business to prioritize it. You will not prioritize it yourself. It is either the product owner prioritizing or the business is prioritizing. If it is the business prioritizing, you're working with them directly through that prioritization. If you leave it to them to do it, they will mark everything as must have. Okay, Tosin, did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, no problem. Awesome. Any other questions? Nora, go ahead, please.
Hi, Abiola. My question is regarding agile sprints. So
Okay.
we know that the sprints typically last 14 to 30 days, but I was wondering, like during the course of a project, are the sprints like the same throughout the project? Like maybe the sprints are always 14 days, or is it that maybe during the course of the project, some sprints could be 14, some could be 16, 18? Like I was wondering.
So that would be bad practice for the duration of the sprint to change. Once the team has decided it'd be 2 weeks, they need to keep it 2 weeks. They have the liberty to determine the duration, but once it's been determined, it needs to be consistent all through the project. Because there are many things tied to the sprint, right? The sprint, will, as we go along sprint 1, sprint 2, we begin to determine our velocity. What does that mean? How fast are we going? How much work can we complete in 2 weeks, right? So if you keep changing that on developers, today, sprint is 2 weeks and they choose 5 user stories. Then the next sprint to change it to 4 weeks. There's no way for them to gauge how many user stories they're going to put into that sprint, right? It impacts the calculation of speed when there is inconsistency in the duration of your sprint. But in short, to answer your question, once you've decided that sprint can be between 2 weeks to 4 weeks, not necessarily 30 days, right? Once we've decided on what it will be, it needs to stay that way till the end of the project. That is best practice.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Any other questions? If there's none, we would wrap it up here today.
Sorry, Abiola, there is a question in the chat.
Oh, in the chat. Oh, okay. Let's see. Please, how does the product owner different? Okay. So the product sponsor usually is part of the executive team. Usually they're like a director or something. That is the person who's fighting for that money for the project. This project is going to cost 200,000. The project sponsor is the one who's going to executive management and saying, give me this 200K and I'm going to make magic happen. Usually it's someone high up there. The product owner is somebody who knows the business well, really, really well. They're not necessarily a director. They could be the marketing manager. The context of a product owner, right, is somebody who knows the business well and can work with the development team during the implementation. Like if the development team, or the BA, they're stuck somewhere, if there's a product owner, the product owner should be able to help them figure out what it is, figure out the right answer, figure out the actual requirement. The product owner knows. So you as a BA could be a product owner. Some companies will hire you and will give you the title product owner. You are not a decision maker when it comes to money. How the project sponsor got the money, you do not know. You do not even concern yourself with it. Okay, the project sponsor, though, is the one who can say, today we're shutting it down. We're not doing the project anymore. The product owner does not. Okay, I hope I'm not mixing them up. The product owner does not have that power. The product owner is from a knowledge standpoint. The project sponsor is from an authority standpoint. I will get you the money to do this project. Okay? I will get you in front of the right audience that you need to be in front of. like I said, it's usually someone high up there. So the two roles are completely separate. I don't even think that there could be an overlap. Just think about it this way. The product owner is from a knowledge standpoint. They know so much, right, about it. So the product, like you call them, they, even though they technically don't own the solution, but we call them product owner because that is how much knowledge they have. But the project sponsor may be clueless. The project sponsor may not even know one requirement, and they don't need to know it. For them, it's about power and authority and influence, just like Priscilla said. Yeah. Did that answer your question?
Yes, yes, this is Dami. Yes, just a little bit. Yes, it did. But can you give me a use case? Just for example, if a marketing manager would be a product owner, then who typically can be a product sponsor, project sponsor? Would you say like a VP? Like, I just need a scenario just
Yeah,
to
it
just
would
to have an
be
idea of the
usually
roles.
someone, yeah. So usually a project sponsor is somebody who on a very high level will be impacted by the project, right? They're like, so think about maybe the VP of marketing. So even though they don't know this too, and yeah, doesn't really matter, right? If you were to trace it up to remember that our functional requirements trace up to our business requirements, right? So at the business requirement level, like at the high level, at the executive level, who will this solution impact? So let's say this solution, we're building it for marketing, sales, and all of that. If we look at the organogram, who do these people report to? Who's the highest level that they report to? Usually that would be the project sponsor. Because imagine that I could be a project sponsor and you could be a project sponsor, Damilola, but your department is risk, finance, accounting, and all of that. But they say they want to do a project that is marketing related. You're not even going to concern yourself with it. You are not going to fight for money for marketing department. It is not your department. Right? But when they say, oh, there is this tool that we could use to revamp finance and accounting and all of that, your ears perk up, right? You want to know what it is about, and you're willing to go fight for money to make it happen, to make these departments that report to you, make them better. Am I saying that there's always that link in between a project sponsor and the department? Maybe necessarily not, but that's usually how it happens. So you're an executive, right? You care about all the departments that report to you. You want them to be the best departments in the organization, right? So if you need to go fight for money to make them better so they can increase their bottom line, they can save money, they can be more efficient, you will, right? You are the one sponsoring in quote the project, except the money is not coming from you. You are going to sit with the rest of your executive people, the other VPs, right? And they've budgeted that this year we're going to spend 1 million on projects, and this project is going to cost 200K. But the other VP for finance and all of that, he also needs 300K. So everybody is coming to vie for money, but there's just 1 million. So every project sponsor is at the top, meeting with the other people at the top to get money for their own project. That is the context of project sponsor, which is completely different from product owner.
Thank you so much. Well
Does that
understood.
explanation help?
Yes, please, it does. Thank you.
Yes, okay. Awesome. So I think that we are time here just so that people can take a break. I look forward to connecting with you all tomorrow. I promise tomorrow's class is going to be a whole lot more interesting. I would appreciate it if 1 or 2 people will be willing to walk me through a process, maybe something that happens at your job now. Don't give us, like very information about your company that you shouldn't give us, right? But you know how, like, if you were walking me through withdrawing money from the ATM, the way you'd be able to walk me through it step by step, I'd like somebody or 2 people in class to be able to walk me through a process like that. And I want to show you what a BA will do with it on the job in real life. If nobody gives me, obviously I'll come up with a process of my own, but I like to have conversations with everybody on the call. Anyway, enjoy the rest of your day or evening or night, depending on where you are, and we'll connect tomorrow.
Thank you,
Thank
Abiola.
you
Thank you,
so much,
Abiola.
Abiola.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Abiola.
Thank you, Abiola.
Awesome. Bye, everyone.